it revolutionized baseball as we know it today.
Curt Flood changed professional sports forever by giving professional athletes many more rights than they previously had. As a result, professional athletes earn millions of dollars every year for playing the games they love, whether it be baseball, basketball, football, or any other sport. Free agency rules allow the player to choose what team they wish to play for, and negotiate with the team by asking for the money they think that they deserve. However, just 44 years ago, professional athletes had no such rights, even though the professional teams and its owners had a clear responsibility to give them rights. But change was on its way. Curtis Charles Flood was born on January 18, 1938 in the Jefferson Davis Hospital in Houston, Texas to Laura and Herman Flood, and moved to California at a young age. Flood played baseball throughout his childhood and played extremely well during high school, but most Major League scouts considered him too small to be a potential Major League player at only 5 feet 7 and 140 pounds. Still, one scout took an interest in Flood, Bobby Maddock of the Cincinnati Reds, and at the age of 18, Curt signed for a $4,000 salary, no bonus, and an invitation to the Red spring training. Curt Flood spent 2 seasons in the Reds minor league system before being traded to the Cardinals in 1957. He began playing every day for the St. Louis Cardinals in 1958 when he was 20. By 1961, he had become an integral part of the St. Louis Cardinals lineup and was performing at a top level. He had his best season overall in 1964, when he led the National League in hits and was selected to play in the All-Star game for the first out of 3 times. He became co-captain of the Cardinals and led them to 3 World Series, winning 2.
But Flood hits away and smashes the ball into the left field corner, where it caroms off the wall for a double.
His form stayed at a top level until the 1968 season, but was below par by his standards for the next season.
Flood, hey, almost Flood, he misjudges it over his head. 2 runs are going to score.
He also won 7 consecutive Gold Glove awards during his career, an award given to the player who played best at his defensive position. Curt Flood had this fabulous career that consisted of 15 years in the major leagues, but this is not what has changed the sporting world forever. Instead, it was what he refused to do that impacts us so strongly today.
I do think that thousands and thousands of ball players owe a lot to Curt Flood for what he did and actually for sacrificing what probably was the last couple of years of his career for the common good.
After 11 strong seasons with the St. Louis Cardinals, Flood was traded to the Philadelphia Phillies along with Tim McCarver, Byron Brown, and Joe Horner for Dick Allen, Jerry Johnson, and Cookie Rojas. Many baseball writers regarded the trade as a swap of 2 superstar players, Dick Allen and Curt Flood. But the effects of this trade would be felt throughout professional sports forever. Flood simply refused to be traded, citing that he did not want to play for the poor-performing Phillies in a dilapidated Connie Mack Stadium for the racist city of Philadelphia. He told the Phillies general manager and the media that he would rather retire than play for the Phillies, even though he stood to forfeit a lucrative $100,000.
He didn't get to end his career the way he wanted to end his career, and he was basically blackballed from baseball for a year, or not blackballed, he just couldn't play because the reserve clause was still in effect.
What stopped Flood from rejecting the trade was the reserve clause, which had been in place throughout baseball since 1879. The reserve clause allowed each team to reserve 40 players, all of whom were unable to sign with other teams. Under this clause, a team could automatically renew a player's contract for another season at as little as 80% of the previous season's salary. The contract the players signed was a 1-year agreement plus a 1-year option. However, before each season, the players had no choice but to accept the team's final salary offers and to sign new contracts containing the same 1-year option provision. To summarize, the reserve clause stated that a player's first team would be his only big league team for his career, unless the team chose to trade him or to release him.
Well, they definitely had no rights back then. I mean, it really was indentured servitude. They had the only recourse that baseball players had before the Curt Flood case was or before free agency was to hold out.
Because of this reserve clause, owners of teams were able to keep their players' salaries relatively low, eliminate all market competition, and reap the profits for themselves, even though they had the responsibility of giving the players rights. They additionally brainwashed players by telling them that the reserve clause was what kept baseball as it was. After being told he was traded, Flood went to the executive director of the MLB Players Association, Marvin Miller, and told Miller that he wished to sue MLB. He aimed to secure the right to free agency for all baseball players. This decision shocked the entire sporting world, and even though he knew that this would cost his career gravely and would not gain any money, he never wavered. He told the St. Louis Globe-Democrat on January 6th, "Sometimes money's not that important. I know it sounds corny, but that's the way I feel." His goal was to change the reserve clause and give baseball players and other professional athletes the rights that their teams were responsible to give them. In December, he wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Baseball, Bowie Kun, saying that he wished to be a free agent, free to bargain with any other major league team. He wrote in a letter, "After 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel that I am a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes." However, this request was rejected by Kun and was told that he was still contractually obligated to play for the Phillies. Howard Cosell, a journalist, asked Flood the question that had been on many fans' minds. "It's been written, Curt, that you're a man who makes $90,000 a year, which isn't exactly slave wages," he said. "What's your retort to that?" "A well-paid slave is nonetheless a slave," Flood responded. Miller decided to hire Arthur Goldberg, a former United States Supreme Court justice, to be Flood's attorney. He felt that Goldberg was their best chance at winning the case. There were major decisions to be made by Flood's legal team, including where and when to file a lawsuit. Eventually, it was decided that they would file both a request for preliminary injunction and a complaint in the Federal District Court in Manhattan for $1 million in damages and injunctive release for the reserve clause. Judge Irving Ben Cooper ruled for Major League Baseball, but Flood appealed to the Supreme Court, where he eventually lost again. Although the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the respondents in Curt's case, ultimately, he was the catalyst that allowed for free agency, which was ruled in the Seats decision 3 years later. The case regarded two pitchers, Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, and was ruled by arbitrator Peter Seats on December 23, 1975. Seats ruled that the two were free to sign contracts with other teams 1 year after the expiration of the last contract. Although MLB appealed to various courts, the judges upheld Seats' ruling. Eventually, players with 6 or more years of experience were allowed to be free agents in 1976, when Major League Baseball and Major League Baseball Players Association signed a new agreement. Additionally, as a result of Flood's case, in 1970, the owners and the MLBPA agreed to the 10-5 rule, which allows a player with 10 years of MLB service, the last 5 with the same team, to veto any trade. Today, free agency allows not only baseball players, but athletes to sign contracts with different clubs or teams after their previous contract terminates.
In sports, though, which is a small but very important, vital segment of our society, he probably had more impact than most. Yeah.
But even with Flood's immense sacrifices, there is definitely room for improvement in modern baseball today. Current minor league players earn less than minimum wage because of loopholes in the system, and Major League Baseball has gotten away with feeding minor league players cheap wages for long enough. These players are fighting for their rights in the present, and we can only hope there is someone like Curt Flood who makes the sacrifices for the sake of other players. Like his hero, Jackie Robinson, Curt Flood had the courage to take on baseball. In 1947, Robinson started a racial revolution in sports by joining the Brooklyn Dodgers as the 20th century's first African-American major league player. Nearly 25 years later, Flood started an economic revolution by refusing to be traded to the Philadelphia Phillies. It is because Flood refused to continue to be treated like a piece of property under the reserve clause that today's athletes have some control over where they play and for how much money. But while Robinson's jersey has been retired in every major league ballpark, few current players even know the name Curt Flood, and even fewer know about the sacrifices he made for them.
You know, he might not have been a Hall of Fame player statistically compared to some of the others in the Hall, but to me, with the impact he had on baseball, just like Marvin Miller, the Union chief, who should be in the Hall of Fame, I think Curt Flood should be there.